Gods of Space by Cummings. The weird purple glow of the planetoid was apparent now, even to the naked eye. The end of Roy Atwood's long, lonely journey was at hand. In the narrow control turret of his small spaceship, he sat gazing. Planetoid 150 in the belt out here, far beyond Mars, was a great leaden disk now occupying nearly a quarter of the firmament. And the purple glow of the Tsarite was puzzling. On Earth, young Atwood's father had located the treasured substance with a giant electrospectroscope, seen it after patient search as a tiny tracery, a faint band upon the prismatic graph of light from this distant world. And now Atwood was here, seeking it. Long since he had discarded the spectroscope, here in his turret. It had been his compass, the identification of Planetoid 150, enabling him to chart his course. It was unnecessary now. He stared, puzzled. Surely there must be an immense amount of the electroidally active Tsarite, the name his father had given it, here on this little world, and all concentrated almost in one spot, apparently. The weird purple sheen was intense. A patch down there on the putty-coloured surface of the 500-mile diameter asteroid. Occasionally he could see it clearly, and then at other times the leaden, sullen, low-hanging cloud masses of the unknown little world wholly obscured it. With his journey's end so near, Atwood's heart was pounding, but a grimness was on him. He was a young fellow, just 24 this Earth summer of 2050, a handsome young giant whose 190 pounds was stretched over a powerful yet almost lanky frame. In Government College of New York, he'd been a champion athlete. What would he be here? Actually, Atwood cared very little what strange form of life might exist here on Planetoid 150. His was not a trip of scientific exploration. Now that the beginning of interplanetary travel was at hand, he was willing to leave all that sort of thing to the professional scientists. His was a secret adventure, and so he had of necessity come alone. His purpose was to land on this unknown little world and get a small quantity of the treasured Tsarite. With that safely stored in the foot-long insulated cylinder which was now ready to strap on his back, he would leave and get back to Earth as speedily as possible. It had been a long journey. Atwood contemplated it now as this round disk of the asteroid enlarged until it was beneath him, stretching all across the lower firmament. And he set his anti-gravity plates to resist his fall and verified that the repellent rocket streams of electroidal gases were ready for the final atmospheric descent. By his calculation, he would emerge from the clouds fairly close to the Tsarite purple glow. It would be early evening here. He recalled the details of Planetoid 150 which had been in the letter to him from his dead father. Meagre details indeed. Dr. Paul Atwood had calculated the asteroid at between 500 and 600 miles in diameter. Then the clouds broke away. Atwood's heart was pounding as he stared down for his first real sight of the unknown world. At first it was a blur of deep purple radiance. It seemed to blind him. This weird glow to which his eyes were unaccustomed. But presently he could see better. Ahead the purple glow suffused the night with its faint but lurid sheen. Then his eyes seemed to grow accustomed to the purple, so that he had the illusion of it fading a little with the details of the scene taking form. A broken forest stretched here, a strange, spindly form of purple and red vegetation. In places it grew to 100 feet or more high in tangled, lush, solid mass of interwoven vines. There seemed no trees. It was all slender-stalked and spindly. Atwood stared, amazed, puzzled. The forest, if it could be called that, grew in dense patches, interspersed with open spaces where there was apparently a little soil. Others were naked, gleaming masses of metallic rock. The forest patches swayed in a gentle night breeze like marine vegetation in water. The stalks of the vines were thick with giant pods, balloon-like things 20 feet or more in length. It was as though gases of decomposing vegetation within them were lifting them so that their upward pull held erect the swaying 100-foot stalks. Off in the distance, from the height at which he stared down, Atwood could see a thread of a river. It gleamed dull purple-green from the Zarite glow, and a reflection of the cloud light. The same glow of cloud light shone on the forest top. Landing demanded all of Atwood's attention, so that after his first quick scrutiny of what lay down there, he looked about for a place to land. He headed for a dim open space in the forest, an almost level 100-foot area seemingly of rocky soil. Then at last he had landed, brought the 40-foot narrow little ship down flat upon its spreading base fins. With air helmet beside him in the event this atmosphere was not breathable, he cautiously opened a pressure exit port. The cylinder's air did not go out. On the contrary, the outer pressure was greater, so that the planetoid's air came hissing in. A rush at first, then a filtering drift, and then it stopped. Atwood's head reeled. He gripped his air mask, and then his head steadied and he discarded the mask. Breathable air. It was heavy, moist, aromatic, with a strange smell of the forest, but breathable. In a moment he hardly noticed its strangeness. In the silence, mingled with the thumping of his heart against his ribs, a low hum was now audible coming through the open port. The voice of the forest. The blended hum of insect life. Was it that? He listened. It was a weird hum. So faint it seemed that he heard it within his head, rather than against his eardrums. A tiny throbbing sound. But he seemed to know that it was vast, the blend of billions of still more tiny sounds. And queerly, it seemed hideous, a thing at which he should shudder, a thing of terror. With a lugubrious grin, he shoved away the thought. Certainly it was no more than a hunch, a premonition. Atwood was clad in short, tight trousers, grey shirt open at the muscular throat, and heavy boots. His crisp, curly blonde hair was matted with sweat on his forehead. The descent through the atmosphere had made his little ship insufferably hot. This moist, heavy night air was a relief, but not much. At his wide leather belt, pulled tight around his waist, he carried a small electroidal flash gun in a holster. The insulated cylinder into which he would put the Zarite was slung from a leather strap over one shoulder. In a hand case he carried his portable mining equipment and a few explosive capsules, but he did not expect to need any of it. Surely this Zarite was on the surface, and with a glow like this it must exist in almost pure state. Perhaps it was not more than a mile from here in the concentrated load, somewhere here in this weird forest. And he needed was but a scant pound of it. He might have it and be back here in an hour or two. Fully ready now for what he hoped was a simple quest, Atwood stepped through the exit port. Within the ship his interior gravity was maintained at about that of Earth. But as he stepped over the threshold, the gravity of the planetoid gripped him. An amazing change. He clutched at the port casemate to steady himself. His weight, certainly most of it, had gone. Swaying on his feet, the lightness made him reel, and then gingerly he took a step. Seemingly he weighed now no more than 10 or 15 pounds. Carefully, with flexed knees, he impelled himself upward. It was the sort of leap which on Earth would have taken him a foot or so off the ground. He rose now to a height higher than his head, and came down, landing in a scrambling heap. For a while, amused in spite of his grimness, Atwood experimented. By the feel of his cautious attempts, a good running leap would sail him 100 feet or more, and probably smash him against a rock. Better to be careful at first. It wouldn't be hard to kill himself, making errors with a power like this. His muscles were so powerful now in comparison with his weight. Then he was ready to start. That faint, weird humming still was audible, but there seemed nothing living here. No insect life underfoot, no birds in the trees. And suddenly he stood staring, stricken. Something was up on top of the nearby patch of forest. The matted vegetation up there 100 feet above him was so solid that he realized now he probably could manage to walk upon it. Something was moving up there. A swaying little blob, vaguely white. Atwood stood silent, watchful with his gun in his hand. The blob seemed about 5 feet tall, white limbs a flowing drape. Then, as it moved, a little more light came upon it, starlight filtering down through a break in the overhead clouds. Atwood sucked in his breath with amazement. A girl. A human girl. Apparently she had not seen him, and suddenly she jumped from the top of the swaying mass of vines and came fluttering down. A girl with pale drapes held like wings in her outstretched hands, so that, like a bird, she fluttered down and landed lightly on her feet. She was only a few paces from Atwood when she saw him. For an instant, amazed, she stood staring like himself, stricken. An Earth girl? Certainly she looked it. A slender little thing, with dark flowing tresses, a draped robe to her knees, a robe with a flowing cape at her shoulders, the ends of which she had gripped to spread like wings as she jumped down. And now he saw that the robe wasn't fabric, but seemingly made of woven dried vegetation. "Well," Atwood gasped, "what in the devil?" With a cry like a frightened animal, she stooped, seized a chunk of rock, flung it. The rock came very much as a hurled rock would on earth. It struck Atwood's shoulder. The girl turned and, with a leap, made off. "I'll be damned," Atwood muttered. His caution this time was gone. He jumped, went 30 feet, landed on his side. Already the girl was gone, and then he saw her, as like a monkey she went up a vine rope. He tried it, hauled himself up with amazing speed. On the vine top he tried running, but after a leap or two, with the girl far ahead of him, he found himself entangled, floundering in the matted mass of vines. His gun had been knocked from his hand, lost as it fell down into the leafy abyss. The girl, apparently less afraid of him now, stood 100 feet away, balanced on a swaying rope-like vine as she peered at him. "All right," Atwood muttered. "I guess I can't catch you." Certainly he had no idea that she could understand him. But suddenly she laughed, a little rippling rill of human laughter, mingled with awe. "You speak my language." Her soft voice was amazed. English. It was quaintly, queerly intoned, but English nevertheless. And she added in wonderment, "Who are you, that you speak the language of the gods?" He could only stare, wordless, and abruptly she was coming forward, slowly at first, and then, overcoming her fear, she jumped and landed beside him. He seized her. "Look here. Who the devil are you?" "Me. I am Ali, goddess of the Marlens." "Well," he said, "whatever that is. Anyway, be reasonable. I'm Roy Atwood. I've just come from Earth. You came from there too, of course. When did you come? Your people, are they around here?" She seemed only able to stare at him as though numbed. Seemingly she understood his words, but certainly not their meaning. "The Earth," she murmured at last. "What is that?" "My people. They are here, of course, the Marlens." Her slim white arm gestured out over the forest top. "I am Goddess Ali." Wonderment was in her dark eyes and in her voice. "And now you come. A god, like me." Her voice faltered. She was trying to smile. "I am afraid I do not understand," she murmured. "A man-god coming here to rule with me. Never did I think that could happen." For a moment, as he sat there, clutching the girl in the tangled vines of the swaying forest top, Atwood was at a loss for words. Beyond doubt, English was this girl's native language. Had some Earth explorers landed here, bringing her when she was an infant? Earth people who had died, or been killed when the girl was too young to have learned anything. But her mature, fluent English belied that. In all those years, from infancy to maturity, alone here with what apparently were primitive natives of this planetoid, She would have forgotten her Earth language. She was staring at him blankly, her wonderment matching his own. "When did you come here?" he demanded. "Can't you remember?" "Oh, yes," she smiled. "I was born. I appeared here, in the forest. It was how you would say 2,000 of our days ago." With the day here about half that of Earth, she was naming something less than 3 Earth years. "You appeared here in the forest?" he prompted. "Yes, from the sky I came. The Marlins saw me coming down in my god chariot." She gestured. "Like yours there. Must have been. Only mine, they tell me, burst into flame and destroyed itself when it touched the ground." A miracle, surely. But to Atwood the miracle was that from a wrecked, flaming little spaceship, somehow she must have escaped alive. Had she come alone, or with others who, doubtless in the wreck of the ship, had been cremated so that the remains of them had never been found? "And you can't remember that coming?" Atwood demanded. "Oh, yes. When human life came to me, I was among the Marlins. I could not talk their language then, but only the language of the gods. This language of yours," she added. "God language of you and of me." Weird. She was obviously sincerely truthful. She believed it. Naive, childlike. Yet there was upon her, implanted by her belief, an aspect of power, a consciousness that she was a goddess here, a radiance of her power and humility, a feeling of responsibility to one on high who had sent her here as his servant. And now she was staring at Atwood, another of God's servants like herself, a man-god. She stared with a little colour coming into her cheeks, and her breath quickened. "I see," he murmured. Then abruptly on her forehead he noticed a scar, white scar, tissue over an area about an inch or so. He reached gently and shifted a lock of her hair. It was the scar of a ragged cut, quite evidently a nasty wound. 3 years ago. "What is that?" he asked. "Oh, that. There was my human blood running from it when they found me. My human birth." A crash when she landed. A brain concussion? And it had stricken her with amnesia. All her memory gone, so that at the instant when she regained consciousness, her life in effect was beginning again. Atwood understood it now. "I see," he nodded. "Well, Ali, my name is Roy." "Roy," she repeated. "I landed just now, from Earth." "The heaven of the gods," she murmured. "Oh, yes. Tell me, surely I came from there too, and you can remember it." "I sure can. Ali, listen. What you've got to understand now." Abruptly, he checked himself. It wouldn't be easy to tell her. And then he had a queer thought. Was it right for him to destroy her faith in her own power to do good amongst the people of this world? Certainly he had better find out what was here first, and she probably would not believe him anyway. "Tell me," he amended, "the Marlins your people here?" Under his questions, she told him with simple directness. The planetoid here was known as Marla. The Marlins were its only race. Not many of them now of recent generations. A few thousands, he gathered, most of them who lived in a settlement here in the forest only a short distance away. "There were many once," she was saying, "but always the rising of the terrible genes killed them off. We have learned now to subdue the genes with the glow of the Dralstone light." The radiance of the Tsarite. Her gesture indicated it. From here on the forest top, the patch of its light radiance showed plainly an earth mile or so away. Weird thing. So far as he could understand now, these genes seemed to be microscopic things of horror. At intervals, caused by the weather or in rhythmic cycles of some mysterious process of nature, the genes abruptly grew from microscopic spores into ghastly monsters. But the radiance of the Tsarite held them in check, so that of recent years the human Marlins had learned to use the Tsarite against these monsters of the half-world, A barrage of Tsarite radiance was set up here to protect the Marlan settlement. "I think I understand," Atwood said at last. "Queerly enough, I came here to get some of that Tsarite, as we call it on Earth. It's needed there." "In the God Realm, they need?" "Yes," he said hastily. "Anyway, never mind that." His thoughts went back to the letter he had received from his father, who had died suddenly. Young Atwood had been taking a postgraduate science medical course in the great Anglo-American University in London. His father's death had brought him hastily back, and the bank had given him the letter which his father had left for him. "My dear son," the letter began, "I am preparing this data for you, so that if anything should happen to me before my work is done, you will be able to carry on for me. I haven't been able to tell you. It has had to remain a secret. I have been working with a Dr. George Johns, astronomer and physicist of Boston. As you know, all my life, Roy, has been devoted to the discovery of the cause of poliomyelitis, the dread infantile paralysis. Dr. Atwood, 10 years ago, had propounded the theory that it was a submicroscopic spore, so small that even the giant electron microscopes could not detect it. So small that it was non-filterable. No filter ever had been devised that could trap it, despite the claims of having done that which other medical men had made. Surely that was a negative result indeed. But then Dr. Atwood had discovered in the ore of Zarium, which existed in very small quantities on Earth, a product which he named Tsarite. He'd spent a considerable fortune doing it, the resolution of many tons of Zarium refined down into an almost microscopic quantity of an electro-radially active substance. And with it, for a year, he worked miracles. As though by magic, the emanations from this tiny Tsarite tube, magnified and projected in the fashion of radiotherapy treatments, had cured victims of the dread disease. But the triumph was short-lived. The Tsarite tube exhausted itself, and on Earth the scarcity of the ore of Zarium was such that to secure another grain of Tsarite seemed practically an impossibility. And then the death of Dr. Atwood had come, and Roy had gotten the letter. His father had secretly been working with Dr. Johns. Together with Dr. Johns' huge electrospectroscope, they had discovered the existence of Tsarite on planetoid 150, and kept it secret. With the era of interplanetary adventure now at hand, both the physicians feared that the Tsarite treasure might fall into unscrupulous hands, be exploited for profit. They wanted to get it themselves, and invent the radiotherapy projectors suitable for its use, and give it all to the suffering children of the world as their benefaction. Dr. Atwood's letter to his son told how, finally, Dr. Johns had secured a small spaceship and had gone trying to get to planetoid 150. Dr. Atwood, in delicate health, had not dared to make the trip. He'd been waiting and had left this letter to Roy with voluminous data as a precaution. Roy had read the letter 100 times. It was in the small spaceship which he had built with the money inherited from his father, and which had brought him here. He remembered its final pleading words. "You must carry on for me, Roy. Believe me, son. The lives of thousands of children will be in your hands, and the health of thousands upon thousands of others who do not die, but live with twisted little bodies, tragic, pathetic, piteous monuments to the futility of man's medical skill. You've seen them. They will be counting upon you." How could he fail them? And how could he fail his dead father? The thought of that was what spurred him, what had brought him here with a grim determination to secure the Tsarite and to get back as soon as possible. "You're very quiet," the girl said timidly out of the silence. "I was thinking," he said. "Out there in our God heaven, if that's what you want to call it, well, it's certainly very queer." Queer indeed. How could he even attempt to explain it to her? These genes, these hideous monsters here on this little world, held in check, destroyed by the Tsarite radiance, And on Earth, the dread submicroscopic spores of poliomyelitis. His father had killed them with Tsarite radiance. As though here might be not only the original source of the terrible spores, but the cure for them as well. Nature striking a balance here and failing to do it on Earth. Did the spores, the genes, drift through the immensity of space? Young Atwood well remembered that even 100 years ago, physicians had advanced some such theory. Spores landing on Earth where conditions would not allow them to grow in size, but where they could only multiply themselves in the bodies of human victims. "I was thinking," Atwood began again, and then he shrugged hopelessly and gave it up. "Ali, listen. Take me to your people now. They will know I'm friendly?" "Friendly? Why, of course. A god, to help them." And he would get his cylinder full of Tsarite, in its pure state, and then go back to Earth. And take the girl with him? The thought occurred to him suddenly, and sent a queer, vague thrill through him. She was helping him to his feet. "We will go," she said. "The god Roy. Oh, they will welcome you." "We're supposed to go up here, over the treetops?" With a faint smile, she regarded him. "Well, it is not very far, but you are clumsy." "I think I'd feel better on the ground," he agreed. A leap down for him from this 100-foot height could have been dangerous. It was different with the girl. On Earth, she might have weighed not much over 100 pounds, and with her slight weight here, the pressure of her spread grass cloak against this heavy air was sufficient. She fluttered down, and like a clumsy monkey he half dropped, half fell, clinging to the vine ropes. They started over the rocks. "We'll take it slow," he said, "until I get used to it." They followed the open spaces between the patches of forest. The weird scene was dim in the night glow. Occasionally now, through breaks in the patches of lush vegetation, Atwood could see the radiance of the Tsarite glow ahead of him, and it was growing. Strange progress, this half-walking, half-leaping advance. It was hard for Atwood to keep his feet. Almost impossible to gauge the distance a leap would carry him. Many times he fell. Muscles that he had seldom used before were beginning to ache. "Let's rest a minute," he protested presently. They were in a rocky defile, like a little gully descending. Atwood dropped to the ground and drew up the girl beside him. More than ever now, the idea of taking her to Earth was in his mind. How could he ever imagined leaving her here, an Earth girl, suffering from amnesia? And he was thinking Dr. George Johns, his father's friend, had left the Earth presumably to come here. "Listen, Ali," he said. "I don't want to confuse you too much. Don't think I'm crazy or anything. In this place where I just came from, there used to be someone called Dr. George Johns. Doesn't that mean something to you? Think back." He stared at her, and on her face at the mention of the name there came a queer, startled puzzlement. Why? She could only stammer, puzzled with some vague consciousness of memory stirring within her, and then it was gone. "Why, what is that?" she murmured. "You speak so strangely. The words I understand, but the things you say—" "Forget it, Ali. I don't want to worry you. There are things you used to know and that you'll remember sometime. They'll come back to you." "My life in God heaven?" "Yeah, sure, call it that." During all this time with the girl, Atwood had been conscious of that weird, gruesome undercurrent of humming, which seemed a sinister background to this little world. And now, as momentarily as they were silent here in the small rocky recess, abruptly he was aware that the humming had greatly intensified. Ali, at the same instant, noticed it. Terror leapt to her face as her hand gripped his arm. "That humming?" she murmured. "Yes. Evidently this is the time for the genes to come out. I thought so. That's why I was out in the treetops tonight, to see if any were around." The genes. On Earth, they might remain always as submicroscopic spores, multiplying in human nerve and brain tissue to cause the ghastly poliomyelitis. But here, they were merely lurking monsters, seasonally growing into visible things of horror, things with a voice, countless billions of them, and their blended tiny voices faintly audible. The rock recess here was dark. It was like a little cave, with an open, narrow front. Atwood and the girl were seated several feet back from the entrance. And now, as the tiny humming suddenly was increasing, in the grotto entrance close before them, a little spot of visible light on the rocks. A spot like a dot of saffron glow. For that stricken second, numbly Atwood stared at it, an inch-long blob of glow with a tiny solid nucleus. Only a second or two, Atwood and Ali sat transfixed with horror. The glow was expanding, a swift expansion, so swift that it was like a saffron balloon being blown up into size tremendous. As though hideous forces of nature held in check, now abruptly were released. A tentacled thing, big as a football. But before Atwood and the girl could more than struggle to their feet, it was a monstrous saffron thing of horror. A round, glowing, luminous, pulpy mass, big as Atwood now. Its bulk blocked the cave entrance. "Good God," Atwood muttered. "We're penned in here." There was no chance for them to leap away. In terror, Ali was clinging to him. The dark, narrow confines of the recess were lurid now with the monster's ghastly yellow light. Its hideous voice was a humming throb. For another second it stood blocking the opening, apparently its full size now, with long tentacles weaving like tongues of yellow fire, and a ring of clustered eyes in its centre, balefully glowing. And then, with a rolling lunge, it hurled itself forward. It was a blur, a chaos of utter horror to Atwood. He had no time to do more than to thrust Ali behind him when the monster was upon him. Weird and ghastly combat. He was conscious of being engulfed by the horrible glutinous mass as the noisome saffron pulp wrapped itself around him. Wildly he fought, staggering with kicking legs and flailing arms. The intense yellow glow so close to his eyes now was dazzling, blinding. Its voice was chattering, like a dynamo gone awry, a throbbing voice that mingled with the girl's cry of terror. "Oh, do not fall! Keep standing!" "You, run!" he gasped. "Get past it, and run!" He mustn't fall. That would be the end. The sticky weight of the thing pressed him. Sucking tentacles were wrapped around him. In the saffron glare he could not see if the monster still blocked the cave opening. If only he could get it further inside, so Ali could slip past. Then he realized that as he fought to get loose, his flailing hands were pulling the oozy tissue apart. He ripped one of the tentacles loose. It fell like a segment of yellow flame, writhing on the ground. But there was no wound where it had been, for it seemed that the oozy flesh flowed around the break. Then he felt Ali tugging at him as again he staggered, almost went down. She was tugging, trying to pull him loose. And the monster now was chattering, enraged voice rising in pitch and trying to draw him inward. A slap of the terrible, horrible stuff struck his face, choking him. He wiped it off, tore loose a great segment of the body and cast it away. "Now, you get free. We can run." The girl's panting voice came to him out of the chaos. Behind him she was pulling at his shoulder, adding her slight strength and weight to his. And suddenly he found himself loose, staggering backward. The monster gathered itself with its glowing fragments on the rocks around it, rolled itself a few feet away. Atwood found that he was in the mouth of the cave. Ali shoved him, and he was outside. "You jump, now!" The huge, screaming saffron ball lunged for them. With his hand gripping hers, they jumped, sailed together in a flat arc over the monster and landed 50 feet behind it. Atwood, who had fallen, picked himself up. At the mouth of the cave, the huge round ball with new tentacles growing upon it stood seemingly confused by the escape of its prey. Then, growling with a low, sullen murmur, suddenly it rolled itself back into the darkness of the recess, lurking with only the reflected light of it at the opening to show that it was there at all. Panting, still with horror making him shudder, Atwood followed the girl. They skirted an edge of the waving forest growth, descending a rocky declivity. Open rocky space was to the left of them now, with a little line of hillocks. Ahead, at a lower level, the glow of the purple zarite radiance. There was a big patch in the darkness. And now in the patch, Atwood could see what seemed a weird little human settlement. Clusters of low, mound-shaped dwellings of rocks and mud and grass. The semblance of crooked little streets. The purple glow bathed it, a half-mile irregular patch, and beyond it and to the sides there was only blank darkness. "That is Marla," Ali was saying. "We shall have to put the light force up now for the season of the growing of genes. The time has come." With his questions, she tried to make it clear. The radiance off there, which enveloped the little settlement, was inherent to the ground itself. Most of the Marlans of this little world lived here, and those who were nearby now at the season of the growing of the genes would come flocking into the glow. A few days, a week or two, and then the genes would die away until the next cycle of their growth. But even this natural glow was not sufficient to hold them off, so that the Marlans set up around their settlement what Ali called a light fence, a sort of barrage, a few hundred little braziers of zarite set at intervals on the ground, their spreading glow mingling with the other one, encircling the village, a barrage which no gene would dare to pass. "I see," Atwood murmured. "But Ali, where do you get that zarite? Near here?" "Oh, yes." She gestured towards the dark little line of hills off to the left. "There it is, most of it, in grottos underground. You see, it's not far." "And what's it like, loose in the caves?" He held his breath for her answer. "Yes," she said. "The Drowl stone, it lies loose in the caves." Triumph swept him. He could get his insulated cylinder packed with zarite, and then get back to his spaceship and away, and take Ali with him. "Listen," he began. "Show me the way to one of those caves. I want to see—" "Here is water for us to swim," she interrupted. "The flesh of the genes is still on us." Heaven knew he had been conscious of it. A little stream of purplish phosphorescent water, impregnated no doubt with the zarite, came bubbling down the slope here from the distant hills. He and Ali plunged in, came out with the purple phosphorescence of the water dripping from them. Atwood breathed his relief. "That's certainly better." Now, if he could get her to lead him to the zarite caves. "Ali? Ali?" It was the sound of a guttural voice calling from the dimness of the rocks near at hand. The startled Atwood turned to see a small group of stocky figures approaching. The Marlans. With Ali gripping him, he stood as the figures came forward and ranged themselves in a jabbering group around him and the girl. They were about 5 feet tall, cast somewhat in earth-human mould, with crooked, heavy legs and swart, putty-coloured skin. The body was wide-shouldered, thick-chested. The round, hairless head was set low in a depression of the shoulders. The face was rough-hewn of feature, and upturned snout-like nose, and small, watery, reddish eyes. They walked with a sluggishness of heavy, solid tread. Quite evidently their bodies were a wholly different density from that of Earthmen. Atwood guessed that here they weighed what might be called 300 pounds, compared to which his own weight was 10 or 15, and that of Ali not more than 5 or 8. Beside them, with their swinging, ponderous movements, Atwood suddenly felt spindly and bird-like. How obvious now that these primitive people would have accepted the beautiful little Earth girl as a goddess. Her coming from the sky in a thing which struck the ground and burst into flame, her seeming miraculous ability to leap into the air, her size, And yet her lightness, her ability to swim, to leap into the vine tops and to run upon their frail, swaying surface. Certainly these marlins would sink like stones in this light water. They could leap no more than a heavy man could leap on earth. Their weight chained them to the ground. Ali! One of them, slightly taller, less ponderous than the others, came forward with a flood of words to the girl. She answered him in weird, guttural, unintelligible words, with gestures towards Atwood, at whom they were now all staring in awe. And then abruptly she added in English, "A man-god has come to us, Boar." "That fellow understands English?" Atwood put in. "Yes, a little. I have taught him, since this time when I was born from the sky." "Language of the gods," Boar said heavily. "It I understand. I am like a god, too." Whatever plans Atwood vaguely had made were swept away now. There seemed not so much awe of him upon these jabbering, crowding marlins as curiosity. They were plucking at him now with heavy taloned hands, feeling his arms, prodding at his ribs, and abruptly he realized the tremendous strength of these creatures. Ponderous power of muscles, a different quality of strength from that of any Earthman. The realization sent a thrill of fear through Atwood. Mentally he cursed himself that he had not seized Ali, rushed her to one of those caves for the Tsarite, and gotten away from this accursed place. But there was nothing he could do about it now. Boar and one of the others gripped him, leading him along, with Ali excitedly beside them and the crowd of jabbering marlins engulfing them. The crowd augmented as they progressed down the slope. It was 50, then 100, and now he saw women. They were garbed much the same as the men, shorter, more flabby-looking bodies with wispy hair on their heads. The shrill voices mingled with the deeper tones of the men as they pressed forward, some of them carrying children, all of them trying to get a glimpse of Atwood. "You are to see our ruler, the great Seller," Ali said as she walked beside him, clinging to him. "Tonight, I'm sure, you'll be proclaimed a god." Her young voice quivered. "Our man-god." "All right, but look here," Atwood muttered. "You better get us out of this now. This crowd is getting pretty heavy." They were among the little mound-shaped houses. The narrow, crooked streets were jammed with pressing people. "Yes," Ali agreed. "To my home first, and then the Seller will send for you." In the Marlin language, she gave her commands to Boar. He seemed to assent, but in the light radiance here which suffused the turmoil of the weird little village, Atwood had a better look at the leader of these marlins. Boar was close beside him, and on the marlin's grotesque, ugly face, Atwood saw an expression very strange. A sort of sidelong leer at Atwood, and a look at Ali that made Atwood's heart pound. It was as though this Boar was sullenly resentful, as though something which he might have been planning was going wrong. And abruptly, as though with a premonition of menace, Atwood recalled the only words of English which Boar had spoken. "The language of the gods," he had said. "It I understand. I am like a god too." Ahead of them, a larger dwelling loomed in the radiant glow. "My home," Ali said. "We'll go there and wait." Ali's dwelling was a house seemingly of 3 mounds interlocked. A glow of dim purple radiance showed through its small open windows, and there were upright ovals for doors. The milling crowd stood watching as they entered. There seemed 3 small rooms inside. Amazement swept Atwood. There was crude furniture here woven of plaited vines, a table, chairs, a little low couch with dried leaves upon it, furniture almost in Earth style. "Where did you get that?" Atwood murmured as he surveyed it. "That? Why, I made it. I do not know why, but that seemed the right thing to do." Memories of her Earth life, which were stirring in her, so vague that she did not recognize them. "You go now, Boar," Ali added. Atwood swung to find the marlin behind him. "Yes," Boar said. "I will tell the great Seller that the man-god has come." Boar's wide, heavy jaws were clenching, and he stood eyeing Atwood and swayed on his feet. "You chew the intoxicating weed," Ali said reproachfully. "That is not good, Boar. You want to be godlike. You should not do that." "I know it," he said. His gaze fell before hers, and then as he turned to leave the room again his strange flashing look swept Atwood, and there was hatred and menace in it. "We will eat now," Ali said. "I have food here." It was a strange meal. The food was peculiar, although palatable, and Atwood hardly was aware of the food as he ate it. At the windows here he could see that Marlins were watching them. Others, undoubtedly, were watching the doors. There would be no chance, certainly not now, for him to get out, even though once outside and free he knew that no Marlin possibly could catch him. Nor had he the least chance of getting Ali out, especially since she would probably be unwilling. "You've told them of the genes," he heard himself saying. Her voice sounded worried. "Yes, they're putting up the barrage now." On impulse, Atwood went to one of the windows. The Marlins there drew back, but stood at a little distance, staring at him. Behind them, the weird, glowing little village was in a turmoil with the excitement of the coming of a man-god, and the news of the genes, the dread season of monsters again at hand. Doubtless the word had spread. From the nearby smaller settlements the people were hurrying here. The streets seemed more jammed than ever now, and out beyond the edge of the village, radiant beams of purple light were standing up at intervals into the sky, spreading beams, intermingling to form a barrage curtain. Atwood came back from the window. He faced the main village street. Atwood was wondering if the other side might not face some space darker and more empty. That would be this adjoining room. "When do you think the cellar will send for us?" he demanded. "Perhaps soon. Perhaps later tonight." He gestured towards the room's inner doorway. "And that room there? That's for me, the man-god." "Yes," she agreed. "Then I'll go there now. You call me if the cellar wants us." Triumph swept him as he reached the dim other room. He had lost his flash gun in the treetops when he was chasing the girl, but he still had his other equipment. He discarded it all now, save the little insulated cylinder slung over his shoulder, the cylinder in which he would store the precious Zarite. The window ovals here were dark. Cautiously, he went to one of them. There was a sort of garden outside with beds, great blossoms topping spindly talks. A little forest of them, high as a man's head. To the left, a section of the village was visible, crowded with milling, excited Marlins. But to the right, beyond the garden, there was dimness. The barrage at the outskirts of the village there had not yet gone up. It should be possible to get out through this window, make a run through the shrouding flowers of the garden. Atwood watched his chance. Then, like a shadow, he was out of the window, sliding into the tall flower clusters. Every instant he feared that there would be an alarm, but there was not. Then he was through the garden, skirting a dark edge of the town. The barrage was going up to the left of him, but its light did not reach him, and in a moment he was in the open country, with great sailing leaps bounding towards the hills and caves of the Zarite. The little cave was a weird, intense glare of violet light. Atwood had no difficulty in finding it. The glare streamed like an aura from its entrance out into the night. The Zarite, almost in a pure state, lay in great powdery heaps. Atwood's hands were trembling as he scooped it up, filling his insulated cylinder, clamping down its lid. More than ever, a desperate haste was upon him now. So many things might be transpiring back in the village, and he realized, too, that his spaceship might be discovered. Within a minute or two, he was into the cave and out again, with his precious little cylinder slung on his back. He was more skillful at leaping now. Ahead, the circular barrage was complete, a vertical violet curtain of light enclosing the village. It made the darkness out here on the rocks seem more intense by contrast. The dim landscape swayed weirdly with his flat sailing leaps, and suddenly off to one side he was aware that round blobs of yellow glow were appearing. the monster genes. With the season of their growth upon them, they were struggling up out of their microscopic invisible world. The night out here was hideous with the throbbing, humming voices of the monsters. Atwood's heart went cold. How would he get the girl out of this damnable place? He could think only that in some way he must quickly persuade her. Together, running, leaping like this, or like birds, following the flimsy forest top which the genes could not reach, he'd be able to get her to the spaceship. With the purple barrage curtain close before him, Atwood slowed up. Then he came within the direct light radiance. Crawling almost flat to pass between two of the braziers, the glare blinded him, and then he was through, rising to his feet. So, here is the god, our man-god, who was gone. It was Boar's ironic, guttural voice. Atwood had no chance to jump away. Boar, with a ponderous pounce, gripped him with the power of a machine. Boar and a dozen of his roistering men were here. Our man-god is late for the ceremony. Boar was leering. They were shoving Atwood forward along a village street crowded with jabbering marlins, across an edge of the village towards an open space, like a public square. The mound dwellings bounded it on one side, and the barrage was on the other. The square was thronged with marlins, standing in jabbering groups, gazing towards the centre where 3 platforms were erected. 2 were side by side, and one faced them. The 2 were empty. On the other, a single marlin sat in a great cradle. The ruler, Seller. His ponderous fat body was round with flesh. In the cradle, he squatted like a huge toad. Boar's grip never for an instant had relaxed on Atwood. I'm to be made a god now? Atwood murmured. Yes, the Seller has decided. Surely that was leering irony in Boar's heavy voice. Where was Ali? Then, as Atwood's captors shoved him towards the larger and higher of the 2 empty platforms, Atwood saw the girl. Slowly she was crossing the square. Ali, robed now in a long flowing bluish grass garment with a garland of flowers around her head. The goddess Ali. The marlins awed and bowed before her as she advanced, mounted the smaller platform, and stood with her arms outstretched. The reflected glow of the barrage painted her face. Apprehension was there. And then she saw Atwood. Relief swept her, and then an exultation. The recognition of a man-god with her to guide these people. Then Atwood, tense and alert, stood on the other platform, facing the ruler. He was some 20 feet from the girl, and 5 feet or so above her. The man-god is here, Boar proclaimed in English, and then he seemed to be repeating it in the Marlin language. The crowd was bowing now with foreheads to the ground. The Seller spoke in a piping, cracked voice, and with a gesture ordered Boar from the platform. Alone, Atwood faced the ruler and the prostrate throng. Out of the corner of his eyes he could see Ali standing stiffly erect, with arms outstretched as though in benediction. And as the Seller now was intoning some ritual, Atwood drew himself up and lifted his arms. But tensely, alertly, he was watching. Where was Boar? The big marlin seemed to have vanished. A dozen of Boar's men were in a little drunken group, their boistering voices suppressed now as they stood at the edge of the platform behind the Sellar's cradle. The barrage was close behind them, and as Atwood's apprehensive gaze stared at the purple radiance, dimly behind it, he could see that the genes were crowding. Attracted by the scent of the human crowd here, they had gathered outside the barrage. Thousands of them, ghastly, tumbling and tentacled balls of saffron, milling one upon the other as they pressed forward. Thousands? There could have been millions. A saffron sea of them out there. The man-god will speak to us now. It was Ali's voice, prompting him. Atwood gathered his wits. He began to talk. What matter the words? He hardly knew what he was saying. For abruptly behind the ruler, Seller, Boar had appeared. Boar, with a knife in his hand, and in that same instant, with a ponderous leap, he plunged the knife into the cellar's bloated back. There was a second of ghastly, startled silence, then chaos. The prostrate Marlins gasped, then leapt to their feet, shouting, milling with terror and confusion. Boar's men from behind the platform leapt upon it, all of them with knives, plunging the blades into the ruler's puffed toad-like body, and then standing, shouting at the crowd. It was a startled instant while Atwood stood numbed. Boar again had vanished, and then suddenly he appeared on the platform with Ali and was standing beside her, with his heavy arm around her as she sagged against him in terror. He too was shouting at the crowd now, and then he shouted in English, "I am the man-god, your man-god, and the new ruler." All in a few seconds, and then Atwood recovered his wits. Like an awkward, plunging bird, he leapt from one platform to the other, landing full upon Ali and the shouting Boar. It took Boar by surprise. Atwood's body struck him so full that he rocked, staggered a little, his grip releasing the girl as wildly he flailed his arms to ward off this huge attacking thing clinging to him. The impact against Boar's solidity all but knocked the breath from Atwood. He found himself hanging with feet off the ground as he clung, and desperately he fought for the knife. Boar's fingers, in his confusion, must have gripped it loosely, and abruptly Atwood had it and stabbed it into Boar's face. Gruesome thrust. It went slowly into the tough, heavy flesh as, with all his strength, Atwood shoved it to the hilt. Boar screamed. His twitching arms pushed Atwood a dozen feet away. With the knife still in his face and horrible ooze bubbling around it, he staggered and fell heavily from the platform. Then he was up on his feet, staggering half-blinded doubtless, staggering towards the barrage, and his scream rang out first in the Marlan language and then in English. "Not to be the man-god!" On the platform, Atwood gripped the shaking, terrified girl. "We've got to get away from here." Why, this is terrible." "You listen to me. Don't talk. If you don't run with me, then I'm going to carry you." He shook her. "We're going, you understand?" "Not to be the man-god!" Boar's scream still rang over the turmoil. He'd staggered, found himself at one of the barrage braziers, and suddenly, in a frenzy, he overturned the thing. Its light went out. A slit of darkness leapt into the barrage. "Not to be the man-god!" A frenzy of disappointment, disillusionment was in Boar's wild voice. All his plans now had gone awry as he felt himself dying from the knife blade in his head. A slit of darkness in the barrage. And now Boar had staggered and overturned another of the lights. It was his last act. He staggered and fell as through the widened dark slit the hideous torrent of screaming, chattering saffron monsters rolled through. In a second, Boar was engulfed. The milling Marlins, shouting in wild terror now, were trying to run. Ponderous, sluggish steps. The horrible yellow torrent engulfed them. "Ali! Ali, dear!" Atwood gasped. The girl, fascinated with horror, had been resisting him. "We've got to try and get away." Yes, I see it." She guided him. Hand in hand, they leapt. A great sailing leap that carried them across the square into a now almost deserted section of the village. And then another. Over 2 or 3 of the mound dwellings. Another, and they went through the opposite side of the barrage. Open country. The monsters were all rushing towards the barrage break. With a leap, Atwood and Ali went over a milling, tumbling group of 100 of them. It was a wild, scrambling, leaping run. The dark, little spaceship lying flat on its hull fins at the edge of the forest was a blessed haven to the panting, bruised Atwood. "Inside! Quick now!" he gasped. Jeans were here, rolling forwards, monstrous blobs of saffron as Atwood shoved the girl into the port and slid its door. Through the heavy bullseye pane, the gathering monsters were a turgid yellow blur. Then the little rocket ship was rising, with its rocket streams flaring out like a comet tail behind it. Atwood and the girl escaping gods from a world which had become a purgatory. In the control turret they sat, staring ahead at the great stars that glittered in the black firmament. The Earth was a tiny, glowing dot. "There it is," Atwood said. "Your world, and mine. We've got the Tsarite, Allie. You wanted to do good on that little planetoid. There'll be plenty of chance on Earth." "And that is the Earth," she murmured. "It's so small." "It's very big," he said smilingly. "You'll see. If only my father and Dr. Johns were alive now to greet us as we came with the Tsarite. They worked so hard for this." "Dr. Johns?" She was staring at him, startled. And then suddenly on her face and in her eyes there was the light of memory. "Dr. Johns? Why... "Yes?" he prompted. "Try and think." "Dr. Johns, why... Gloria! Yes, there was a Gloria. What? That's my other name. His daughter, Gloria Johns. Why, of course." Gloria Johns. "Then your father and mine, they were friends?" Atwood murmured. The familiar scenes of Earth would bring everything back to her, and Ali, goddess of the planet, would be gone. There would just be Gloria Johns. They sat gazing at the immensity of space, at the tiny dot of light which was their great world, waiting for them. This audiobook is copyright Felbrigg Herriot, 2020.